Good evening and welcome to the New York Symposium with Diane Sayre. I am Diane Sayre, a LaRouche independent candidate for U.S. Senate. And what we're going to be talking about tonight is the actual suppression of the electoral process. We've heard all kinds of things, many hysterical about the right to vote and voter suppression, etc. But what many people are not aware of is that there is terrible suppression of your choices. In fact, there may be a reason why many people don't want to vote, because the most qualified candidates are kept off of the ballot and kept out of the process. And the amount of money that people spend on elections now seems to be gobbled up by lawyers for lawsuits, as opposed to being able to campaign and reach the American people. And I think there's a lot to be said about reform. But just before I get to that, let me remind everyone, in case you didn't notice, where we are. As Helga Zepp-LaRouche said in her webcast this week, we are probably at the most dangerous moment that mankind has ever faced. We are facing a real threat of thermonuclear war, not because of President Vladimir Putin, but because of a policy of the United States, NATO, and the UK, which completely disregarded Russia's legitimate security concerns. And frankly, even that is an understatement. What you have is a group of billionaire bankers who met at the COP26, otherwise the Davos group, which is coming right up in a couple of days here, who are bankrupt. They're presiding over a bubble that is collapsing. And one, they want to squeeze every last drop of loot out of the people. So we're experiencing massive hyperinflation. You have to ask yourself, if the United States only gets about 3% of our petroleum from Russia, why is it that Biden's sanctions have caused the price of gas to get to, in many places in the country, over $5 a gallon? Why are people saying we may have to ration gasoline and diesel fuel? What will that do for the food getting to your grocery store? Then you have the fact that the Congress, Biden asked for $33 billion to fund the war in Ukraine, with weapons going to members of the Nazi Azov battalion who are committing hideous war crimes, which are not discussed. And only 11 members of the Senate questioned this. And not only that, Biden asked for $33 billion and the Congress raised it to $40 billion. So, this is really very dangerous. If you say that Putin cannot be allowed to win in Ukraine when Russia obviously has the military superiority and would win, what does that mean that you're planning to pour into that war to keep it going? And it's clear that they intend for it to keep going for a very long time. And in those kind of circumstances, the danger of miscalculation is great and increases the more desperate that people get. So in such a moment, you would think that people of goodwill would be very interested in having new candidates, many candidates with new ideas on how to solve problems like this, candidates who can engage the American people who largely have walked away because they're so disgusted with the political process. But that is not the case. And I just want to say I was involved in a situation here in New York. I was in court yesterday in an intervention launched by myself, the Libertarian Party, and the Libertarian candidate for governor, Larry Sharpe, because the state of New York, until today, I guess they were supposed to announce them, had no congressional districts. They had congressional districts, which were horribly gerrymandered. And to the shock of many of us, reason prevailed, and the gerrymandered, when I mean wildly gerrymandered districts, were redrawn by a special master, but it put everyone running for the House of Representatives into limbo. And this obviously affected the petitioning campaign for parties with a slate of candidates, not just statewide, including the Libertarian Party. My campaign was affected as well, but differently, because statewide races, you have to file 45,000 valid signatures and you have 6 weeks to collect them, which is already a sadistic form of punishment to stop people from being able to campaign because you're busy getting the signatures. But then there's a requirement that you have to get 500 valid signatures in each congressional district, except the database for the new maps will not be available until May 27th, and I'm supposed to file, or we're supposed to file our petitions on May 31st. So you have 4 days. It's really almost physically impossible. Now, the geniuses who represent Governor Hochul, the Board of Elections, and the majority leaders of both houses put out a statement. I just want to share some of it with you because it really is hilarious. They claim that the COVID health emergency has no impact because there's no restrictions. Well, one, Hochul has said that because the case numbers of COVID-19 are rising again, masks are recommended indoors. They're not recommending anything outdoors. There's no mandates as far as masking and distancing go at the moment. So they say, therefore, there's no effect, except people are afraid. Churches, mosques, places where we go for signatures, I've been told the attendance is down by about 50%. I had one of my petitioners actually get COVID from petitioning, most likely. Another one also came down with COVID. Then we had people who had to quarantine because they'd been exposed. Then we had very important petitioners who couldn't go out because they live with elderly people with pre-existing conditions who were worried about their health. But now here's the recommendation. Think about this. This is from the legal document they submitted. Currently, there is no public health emergency in New York preventing petitioning, albeit indoor masking is strongly recommended in most places and required in some. Nothing in New York, current New York law, prevents persons circulating independent nominating petitions from calling voters by phone, emailing voters, or using social media to solicit signatures and then make comfortable arrangements for the signature collection. Can you imagine getting 45,000 signatures by calling someone on the telephone and making an appointment for how you're going to get their signature and, I don't know, pass the clipboard through the window or something? Signature gathering is a high contact, high traffic activity, especially if they're demanding 45,000 signatures. I found this. Oh, and then here, the signature collection process can easily be accomplished applying social distancing. For example, the clipboard or folder containing the petition sheet the voter needs to sign can be placed for the signer to pick up at a comfortable distance after the witness steps back. So, you know, we have to be able to read people's handwriting. In New York, line by line challenges are not uncommon. So the idea that you're going to throw your clipboard to someone 12 feet away and then they're supposed to sign and walk off, and then after they've gone 100 yards, you discover that you can't read anything that they wrote. It's just absurd. But these people obviously never had to do any such thing because they're part of the party machine. They get on the ballot automatically. So just complete disregard. And then they go on to say, if you can't do this, you're not a viable candidate. Well, I have not run for office in New York before, but I certainly have a formidable presence. I have a distribution network for a newspaper I started of a few hundred people. I've been speaking all over the state, but take the Libertarian Party or the Green Party, whose viability has to be tested. The Libertarian Party has won numerous elections over their 50-year history in the state of New York. And I'll let the Libertarian candidate, if he's on, speak to that. But everyone knows them as a party. They have nearly as much name recognition as the Democratic or Republican Party, certainly the Green Party the same. So who decides this viability? And this coming from a nation which was talking about imposing a disinformation governance board. That's the other thing the lawyer said during the hearing. They said that we shouldn't raise alarmist accusations of violations of the First Amendment. So it really was quite something. But I will say the Disinformation Governance Board was defeated. We've been hearing about some interesting electoral victories around the country. And I think that there's a backlash going on against this kind of suppression of ideas and dialogue. So that's what I wanted to say to open. And let me just introduce my other guests here, and then we'll go to Randy. Jose, can you put us all on the screen? So I guess if I can't see everyone, but I mean, I suppose everyone can. So I have Randy Perham, who is, or will explain to us about his candidacy for the U.S. House of Representatives in Alaska. I have Joel DeJean, who is a LaRouche independent candidate for Texas District 38. And is Mark with us?
No.
Okay, I'm hoping that Mark Brayman, who is the congressional candidate with the Libertarian Party, will be able to join us. I know all of us are going absolutely nuts with these outrageous signature requirements. So why don't we go ahead to Randy right now?
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Diane. So, my name is Randy Perham. I'm running for the U.S. House of Representatives for the great state of Alaska. And right now we're facing a special election. And within the special election, it's due to because of the late Congressman Don Young passed away back in March. And so there's a special election going on that's going to run from June all the way up to our primary date, which is August 16th. And in between that time, there's now 48 candidates on the ballot, although I'm remaining on the primary ballot, but the special election ballot, I decided to stay off of that because there's just no point if they're going to just do an election all over again anyways on the primary. So that's where things are right now. And to Diane's point, for candidates to run for office, when we say that there's a free and fair election, it should not be a requirement to get signatures more than the other party. It should not be a requirement to, jump through all of these silly hoops and everything. You should be able to just go down to your local elections office, file to run, and let the people decide from there without party intervention, without any kind of nefarious activities on behalf of others to stop you from being on the ballot. If you're not meant to be if you're not a viable candidate, then it's very simple. The people won't vote for you. Let the people hear your voice and let them decide from there without any intervention. With that being said, thank you for your time and look forward to the discussion tonight.
Great, thanks. I got slightly disrupted for a minute by a phone call. But why don't we go to Joel DeJean and hear if you have response to what was said and also your own thoughts on what's happening there.
So I'm running in the new congressional district, the 38th district. Texas was awarded after the census 2 new districts. And I've been going around to city councils in the district, to farmers markets, to some conservative Republican meetings. And especially in the Republican meetings, no one I talk to has seen my Republican opponent. We've already had the Republican primary back in March 1st. And it was a 10-man race. And my opponent, who won the race without a runoff, Wesley Hunt, is nowhere to be seen. I've talked to various Republicans, various city councilmen. Nobody has seen him campaigning. Now, it was explained to me today by a major article in the New York Times, of all places, which went through how there is a rising black star in the Republican Party who is advising to promote diversity. Well, it turns out the reason why no one has seen Wesley Hunt in the district is because he is so confident with his $4 million in the bank and his endorsers like James Bacon III and Ted Cruz and Mike Pompeo. He is so confident that he's already won that he is spending his time campaigning for other Republican candidates, not only in Texas, but around the nation, in Michigan and North Carolina and California. And the coverage from the New York Times says that not only is he campaigning for these other candidates, but he has established a political action committee to donate money to other candidates. Now, his PAC is called Hellfire PAC. Our Hellfire, I'm sure, comes from the Hellfire missiles he fired from his Apache attack helicopter during his tour of duty in Iraq. So he is raising money to donate to other Republican, mostly veteran candidates. Now, in the article, there's no coverage, no mention of my candidacy. There's a slight mention of the Democratic Party runoff, which is occurring next week. They don't even mention the name of the Democrats. So here you have the most important newspaper as far as political influence in the nation virtually endorsing a candidate. So not only are they rigging the elections by how you get on the ballot, they're rigging the elections with media coverage. So we have to break that. And I think reality of hyperinflation and the threat of World War III is gonna help break this media grip on who you're allowed to vote for. I'll stop there for now.
Great, thanks. I had a question for Randy, actually. How many candidates were there for this special election?
Currently, there's 48. 48 candidates.
See, I thought when New York said there was such a threat for all these people running for office that they were actually just exaggerating, because there certainly weren't. There were maybe 8 people running against Schumer, and no one likes to run against Schumer because he has so much money and he works so closely with the FBI. But 48, and is that still the case or what?
Yes, it's still the case currently. Matter of fact, I just got the mail-in ballot myself a couple weeks ago. Yeah, there's 48 candidates running. Among the I guess you could say the stars that are running is Sarah Palin and Santa Claus. Santa Claus is actually a legitimate certified candidate on the ballot as well. So, you know, it's kind of like who can run against Santa Claus? You know, that's international name recognition right there. You know, so I'm not trying to have lump coal in my stockings this year, but you know, yeah, but that is the case right now. There's 48 active candidates currently on the ballot for the special election, and I believe there's going to be a if they decide to do the ranked choice voting style for the special election to determine the winner for the primaries, then they're going to do that ranked choice voting style, and the leftovers, if you will filter over into the primaries as well. So we'll see how that goes, and it's a mess right now, and people are still trying to figure it out. So I'm just sitting back like, let me know what happens when it happens. So it's crazy right now. But we don't have the signature acquisition requirement in Alaska, which is I guess you could say, thankfully, a good thing, because we do follow the Constitution, where, you know, any person who feels that though they want to run for office, they file. And that's right. It. You know, as long as you meet the constitutional requirements to be a candidate for office, then so be it. So right. That's where things are at right now. That is why there's 48 candidates right now. Wow. It was 51, but 3 of them dropped off.
Wow. Are they organizing any kind of debates or ways that people can get heard, or?
Not that I'm aware of, not for the special election anyways. There was, prior to the passing of Congressman Don Young, there was a few organized debates going on with the primary candidates, but during this particular special election, I don't believe there's been anything organized. They just kind of let them go, you know, free willy out there and campaign on their own and garner as many votes as they can.
Wow. Yeah. That's really something.
Yeah.
Goodness. Joel, any thoughts?
Well, I'm wondering if Sarah Palin got some money from that Hellfire PAC. She was endorsed by Donald Trump, just like Wesley Hunt was. So I don't know if she's on the inside.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if she's received any money from that particular PAC. But I know going in, no later than an hour after she registered to file to run, President Trump came out and endorsed her. So it was kind of, I guess you could say, some behind the scenes conversations that transpired in order to get her to run and receive that endorsement almost simultaneously. So I'm sure that there's going to be a big money financial backing for Sarah Palin for due to the endorsement of President Trump. However, there's also what's going on in Alaska right now is there's a dynamic paradigm going on between Alaska GOP establishment candidate, which is Nick Bates III, and then you have the Trump-backed candidate, which is Sarah Palin. So those two are clashing head to head right now amongst the 49 remaining candidates that's spread between the different parties. So it's an interesting contest nonetheless, and there's already been over $1 million harvested between the candidates, just between them two alone. So never mind the rest of the field. So it's going to be a big money pot game, given that Alaska only has one congressional seat for the entire state. And, being that the population and the sparsity of the state, it's going to be difficult for whoever is campaigning to get around to everybody in that short amount of time to get their voice heard, get their platform recognized, and to successfully garner enough votes to surpass the ranked choice voting requirements.
Right. One thing that's become increasingly clear, and I've brought this up before, but I don't know that all of our viewers are familiar with what an aristocracy we have. Mm-hmm. The Federal Elections Commission nominally was created to help level the playing field, but really, I think it was created to stop Lyndon LaRouche actually and various of his campaigns. So they have these limits on donations, right? If you're running for federal office, the legal limit is $2,900 that anyone can give in an election cycle. But you had Citizens United, who have all these loopholes where people can get what they call dark money because it's laundered through various 501c for organizations or PACs. So you don't know a PAC has to be reported, but other things don't, right? So it's secret money that people can get in large amounts. And then the thing that I think is really obvious is they say there's no limit to what a candidate can spend on their own campaign.
Yeah. So
right away, it means that the rich people have the advantage. Period. Mm-hmm. End of story. If you're not a rich person, and so someone who's wealthy enough to pour millions of dollars into their own campaign, what is going to be their relationship to the average voter?
Little to none, realistically. They're not out in the streets every day, so to speak. They're not at the coffee bars, they're not at the local restaurants, mingling with everyone on a day-to-day basis to understand the true struggles that the everyday average American or the average family is going through. They have millions of dollars sitting in their coffers, and they can, get on a jet plane and leave, that area for days to weeks at a time without any worries. So there's very little to no relatability there. And it's unfortunate that we allow, in the United States, that is, we allow large sums of money to influence our politics. And the other sad thing is that we as the people, we allow it to transpire, versus saying, just because you spend $1 billion on your campaign doesn't mean I'm gonna vote for you. I'm gonna vote for that little guy that spent next to nothing, just like New Jersey did. The one guy in New Jersey that beat out the Senate president there, $156.
Right.
and took him out. That needs to happen across America. And every incumbent that's in office right now, that should be a warning sign to them that everyday kid on the street that has a passion for his country and a love for his community can beat you with less than $200 to vote for you. And that's what should happen.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was thinking these are the people who say, we're going to stick it to Putin. We don't need gasoline because we can all get electric cars. Well, how much is a Tesla? How much?
Good luck. Yeah, good luck with that.
Right.
I seen the price tag on a Tesla, and I will. If I need to build my own oil rig to harvest my own gas, then I would do so. I'll probably come out cheaper.
Right.
Speaking of electric cars, we had another warning from the Electric Reliability Council of Texas that, surprise, surprise, it's going to be hot in Texas. It's going to be in the low 90s. So not only do they not have enough reserve power for just a typical spring or summer day, but you can imagine plugging in a 1 to 2 million electric cars. We may not have enough electricity for just air conditioning, let alone electric cars.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, so we definitely have a job to do. I mean, I think you may have heard about this, a fellow, and I think, Randy, he was on a program with us, Jeff Young in Kentucky. He won the Democratic primary for Congress. Mm-hmm. He is not a multimillionaire. He was quite outspoken about the weapons going to Nazis in Ukraine. The media is roasting him for this, but he won. He won the primary. And I find that delightful. I think it's indicative of, as I said, a kind of a phase shift. They couldn't get their disinformation governance board through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say congratulations to Jeff Young, because being outspoken on, sending billions of dollars over to Ukraine, this is nothing but this is a war for the elite. This is a proxy war for the United States, number one. Number two, a war for the elite. They're sitting in Congress spending our money on a war that we as American people have absolutely nothing to do with. At the end of the day, we're still trading with Russia. We're still trading with China, but we sit here and say that they're adversaries of the United States. Well, if you're an adversary, if you're a so-called quote unquote enemy of the United States, then why do we have trade agreements? Why are we giving them money to action out against the United States? It makes absolutely zero sense. So where's the lie here? Are they actually adversaries, or are they just doing things smarter than you are as the federal government, and you just don't like it, so therefore you're going to label them as adversaries? That's what I'm trying to figure out here. So, for the candidates that are standing up and speaking out against, the support to Ukraine, don't get me wrong here when I say this. We support, innocent people being harmed in the process. However, once again, this is a proxy war conducted through the Western state, through the Western Alliance, and they're going against Russia for whatever reason, because Russia is feeling threatened. And just like every other sovereign nation, Russia is a sovereign nation as well. They feel as though they need to defend themselves at all costs. That's what they're doing, just like the United States has done, just like China has done. Every other country in the world has done this. So I'm just wondering, where's the end game in all this?
Sure. And you know something about this. Did you mention your military background at all? Would you care to?
Yes, I did 22 years in the Army. I retired in 2020. I did 22 years in the United States Army, and I've been all around. Did three combat tours to Iraq, and did a contingency operation tour in Kuwait. I've spent my last 3 years working in NATO, so I understand the NATO apparatus very well, and traveled around Europe to different countries, having these very discussions, actually. So for anybody that wishes to challenge me on that, please. Yeah, I'm always on social media, and I'm always talking about these things. So I'm more than welcome to have a conversation.
Hi, can I interject here for a minute? It's the producer.
Yeah,
here.
Can we see you? Jose is one of my petitioners. Jose, come on.
Okay, here we go. I think I just need
and he's the skilled AV guy.
I do my best. Thank you. Hi. I first of all, I just wanted to say, to hear that in other states that, you can 48 candidates on a ballot is a good thing. Actually, mm-hmm. I don't know why people complain. They're like, oh, you're going to pollute the ballot. What does that mean exactly? And I wanted to pose this because I had somebody who was asking, what are we doing? Who are you petitioning for? I said, Diane. Is she a Democrat? No, she's an independent. And he freaked out. He said, no, you cannot have independents on the ballot. They will split the vote. And I said to him, well, maybe the vote should be split. I don't know. Why should, what are you afraid of exactly? Like, can we actually, like, what is it you think will happen? Oh, we're going to put a Republican in the seat, because they're going to take votes away from the independent. And I said, well, Republicans say the same thing, right? Well, maybe people shouldn't vote on party lines. So, what is your response? And people say, no, you're just splitting the vote. I mean, personally, I think it would be great if among the 48 candidates, everybody got like 2% of the vote. And then it comes down to like the hair wire. That would be amazing. If that happened, So that, yeah. I just wanted to pose that.
Yeah, no, Jose, you're actually right. I agree with you there. That shows viability amongst the candidates. If there's 100 people on the ballot, let it be. It's no different than how the United Kingdom does the UK does their elections. They let whoever run, and they get equal airtime. Number one, that's important here, especially in the United States. For us as candidates, we should be able to get equal airtime or access to equal airtime. And they also have a spending limit on what they can spend on their campaigns. And plus, oh, by the way, the even more important piece, it is a time limit on their election cycle. Ours seem like it goes forever. I feel like I've been campaigning for a decade now. It's like, geez, when's this going to end? So, yes, I feel as though, as many candidates that feel like they can, run for office, they should. And let the people decide. Once again, it goes back to giving the power of the voice to the people and let them decide. So if all 51 or 1,000 candidates on the ballot get 2% of the vote, then so be it. And it dwindles down, and then the election process just continues on and filters out from there. And may the best person win at the end of the day. But everyone had equal access to the ballot. That's the key. It was a free and fair election that we so-called as Americans scream about all the time. Let's actually live up to what it is that we talk about and do these things.
Yeah, I would just say, I don't think that the people who are in power should have the power to decide who gets on the ballot and who doesn't, or to even decide, where the redistricting lines are, or, because if somebody, especially like a Democrat, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, right? And I've heard this on the streets, oh, of course they don't want independents on the ballot, right? Because they're trying to preserve their power, right? Now, you would think the Board of Elections should have sole power as to, to decide who should be on the ballot. But, and I know Diane has mentioned this before, maybe it could go into it a little bit more, that you can just change the requirements on a whim, that this was like snuck into a budget bill for independents to get on the ballot from 15,000 to 45,000, just snuck in there, right? And this wasn't even on some principled basis. It was just the case that our governor was upset with the Working Families Party and said, you know what, I'm going to make it 3 times as hard for you to get on the ballot now, right? Yeah. It's just like a child throwing a tantrum that has real ramifications. So what is that, right? How should elections be decided? How should it be decided who gets on the ballot and who shouldn't? That's what I pose here.
Oh, hold on, because I think Dennis Speed has joined us. And I think Joel had something to say, and I know Dennis has a video we should watch, which is very relevant to this discussion. But Joel, go ahead.
Oh yeah, one thing I want to say is that down here in Texas, the Republicans pretend to hate Biden and the Democrats. Well, they just voted. All of the Democrats in Texas, the congressional Democrats, voted to send a $40+ billion to Ukraine, even though several of those Democrats had signed a letter 3 years ago saying, don't send any money to the Azov Battalion, which is a racist, white supremacist Nazi party. Now, in the Senate, John Cornyn went with McConnell to Kiev just last week. He voted to send $40+ billion to Ukraine. And just yesterday, Ted Cruz, who pretends to be the great independent thinker, voted to send the money. So while you're allowed to disagree on petty issues, when it comes to war and actually solving the economic depression that we are in, both parties are totally corrupt and useless.
Great. Dennis, are you there? Ooh, terrible echo.
Yes, I think so. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Well, yeah, some
Can
problems.
we look at you too, or you don't want us to see you?
No, I don't think you're going to get much of a look at me at the moment.
There will be a substitute picture for the stream.
Yes, so that's going to pass for tonight. But I think if you've got the video there, Jose, I'll just set it up. I mean, some people have heard about this incident, some people have not. This involved George W. Bush. Of course, it was involved George Herbert Walker Bush. That'd be really interesting. But George W. Bush had a recent speech in which he was attempting, in his inimitable fashion, to go after and to chastise Vladimir Putin, more or less the same way that everybody has taken this up as a kind of sport, kind of a 2-minute or 5-minute or 10-minute hate. And something happened in the course of his discussion. And for those that haven't seen it, we want to make this available, in that it's important to know that this actually occurred. This isn't a constructed video. It's something that, a lot of people got very upset about, but should be seen to be understood. So if you can roll that, Jose, that'd be useful.
In contrast, Russian elections are rigged. Political opponents are imprisoned or otherwise eliminated from participating in the electoral process. The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia, and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, too. Anyway, 75.
Okay, so now that actually occurred. There have been various commentaries that have appeared in magazines like the New Republic and others about this incident. And it's relevant to cite one of them, in which a woman who's about 35 years old now wrote the following. I don't have the name of the author right with me, but she said, "This week, former President George W. Bush detonated a nostalgia bomb in my brain. In the midst of criticizing the Russian government in a speech in Dallas on Wednesday, Bush said the following," and then she says what he said. So just to say what he said, "The result is an absence of checks and balances in Russia and the decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq." He then stopped, shook his head, and said, "I mean of Ukraine." And under his breath, as if there was no microphone, cameras, or audience in front of him, he muttered, "Iraq too." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought, there's absolutely no way he just said that. And in an instant, the gaffe takes me back 17 years in time, and back to basically 2003, 2004 at the time of the Iraq War. So I think what is important to note here is there's a kind of, it's called the cranes of Ibycus. We've referred to it before. There's a principle of actual universal law. Some people use the term natural law, and that's probably a useful term, but it's sometimes misunderstood. But the principle indicates that under certain conditions of both stress or great tension, what happens is that the truth comes out. And the truth is that for quite a while, since particularly 1989 through 91, the United States has operated with a form of triumphalist doctrine, not believed by everybody, not supported by all the people in the country. But it subscribed to the idea of the United States as a kind of world hegemon which could alter the course of history at will. Matter of fact, a man by the name of Francis Fukuyama wrote a book called The End of History, stating that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, this was an end of history. And of course, this is now seen as absurd, but it was actually seen as absurd and easily could be seen as absurd at the time it was stated. The process underway that we are living through with the recent expansion of NATO by another two countries and the de facto incorporation of Ukraine into NATO for a third, during which process we hear criticisms of Putin for seeking expansionism, even as expansionism occurs before our eyes, which is said to be a defense of a nation whose military expenditures are exceeded by the countries of NATO by 50-1 now, and now with the additions of Finland and Sweden, if that occurs, by 70-80-1. And so it's sort of useful to remember that while people today like to talk about how the fact that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq is sort of lamentable and tragic, the truth of the matter is that the preventive war conducted by the United States was a war crime according to the Nuremberg codes and the Nuremberg actions that were taken after the Second World War. And it's irrelevant, therefore, to understand why persons and nations around the world don't take the United States very seriously, can't take the United States very seriously in the characterizations thrown at the nation and people of Russia, as well as the president of that nation, when they hear these outraged denunciations of the war crimes of Russia. So I just thought it useful because if you haven't heard it or seen it, you should take a look at it and recognize that this is a former president of the United States who doesn't merely have a so-called gaffe, as people like to call this, but as in a second go-round references the same thing.
Yes, very significant. There's a few questions that have come in, and we definitely have to wrap up by 8:30 because we're still in the thick of the petitioning fight here. One is just a report that came in from another person out petitioning who said that she met a person identifying themselves as the chair of the local Democratic committee and also a member of the Republican committee, and neither one of them would sign the petition for Sayre for Senate to get on the ballot. So she said, there you have it from the party hacks, their commitment to having an election or debate. Then there's another question that came in from someone to Joel DeJean about the Texas energy policy, which you touched on briefly, but if you want to say more about it, because people do find it rather amazing that the state of Texas would be having power issues as they had with the great freeze last year, and now the heat wave you're talking about.
Now, most people would think that's because of the environmentalists and the Democrats. But the reason why we have power issues in Texas is because of the same idiot you heard on the video, George W. Bush, who received millions of dollars from Enron. Enron wrote the deregulation of natural gas for Texas, the deregulation of electricity for Texas, and the deregulation that occurred in California. And the reason why we have 11,000 useless windmills in West Texas is because of Enron and George W. Bush. So George W. Bush pushed renewables into the power grid, destabilized the electric grid, and that's why we have the potential of blackouts during the summer and why we did have a blackout that killed almost 1,000 people in Texas in February of last year. So again, we have George W. Bush and his Republican controllers, who are the very same people who control and endorse and finance Wesley Hunt.
Any comments on that? Ooh. Am I still getting that echo? No. Okay, good. Any thoughts, Randy, on that or anything else?
Only thing I can say is I'm Joe's spot on there. You know, I'm down here in Texas as well, so I feel I do understand the energy constraints that we're facing right now also. And you know, to further his point, you know, we with the great freeze that happened last year, it was eye-opening. You know, with the push for the Green New Deal, the push for green energy and everything else, it just showed that should have been the mechanism to show the rest of the United States that we're technically not ready to deal with this, to deal with any kind of implementation of green or renewable energy at this juncture right now. Now, I understand a phase out solution, that's one thing, but to just totally try to eradicate one thing and then say, oh, we're going to build on the next thing. No, it shouldn't be that way, because the way the system failed here in Texas last year, it was solely because you had an out-of-state entity trying to manage another state's energy sector, and they had no clue what they were talking about or doing, because they were not here to see the conditions. They were not here to see the environmental issues that was surrounding everything. So I say all that to say that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, fossil fuels have worked for hundreds of years now, you know, and it will continue to work for the next hundreds of years. So we should be able to maintain that system of living, and then we can slowly bring in things and phase out fossil fuels as needed. But to try to totally eradicate fossil fuels without any clear evidence that is actually going to be anything of benefit, you know, it's kind of far past at the end of the day.
Well, I've made the point that, and as LaRouche defined it, which you're not even really allowed to say today, but the measure of man's growth in the universe is our increasing power over nature, that this is a good thing, that it's good that we can alter our environment, that we're not just out there naked with no shelter, exposed to the elements and dying at the age of 17 of some disease. We discovered things that allowed us to raise the standard of living and made it possible for nearly 8 billion people to live on the planet. And the fact that we're not primarily dependent on nuclear fission at this point is insane, because that's a highly concentrated form of energy that uses very little fuel for enormous productivity. And as Joel has been advocating most strongly, I think I called him a fusion fanatic, is the the next phase of this, where we have to get to. So, Mr. Fusion representative, if you have anything to say, please.
One thing I tell every city council or every group that I speak to is I warn them of the danger of war. And I say the only transition we should have is the transition to thermonuclear controlled fusion. And we have a choice. Are we going to have thermonuclear fusion, or are we going to have thermonuclear war? And I think if they have that choice, it's pretty clear which way we should go.
Exactly. So I think I'd like to wrap up. I just want to say a few things to the people who are working on the petitioning and where we stand. But if anyone has any thoughts prior to that, either of you, do you have any parting words you want to say before I go through that?
No, just good luck. I say it's unconstitutional and should be therefore declared as illegal to have to go through any kind of petitioning process, especially where there is a disparity in requirements between the parties. That should be just unconstitutional in its face by itself. But that's a requirement for the people to fight. If the people in New York and any other state that have similar requirements, if they fail to stand up, they fail to speak out, and they fail to fight, then you are just as complicit or naive, and you're just accepting it. So that's where we are as citizens in this country right now. We're either complicit or naive.
Right. That's right. Joel, do you have any comments?
Well, I think the political leadership of New York State has proven their total incompetence. And it starts at the top with Chuck Schumer and the Governor Hochul. So while they talk a good fight about limiting weapons to crazy teenagers, their support of the war in Ukraine shows that they're just a bunch of con artists. And they're so incompetent, they can't even gerrymander an election.
Exactly. So I'll say where we are, and then if Dennis Speed may have some thoughts. But basically, we want to try and the filing deadline, this intervention, which was demanding more time because the requirements were so unreasonable, was rejected in court. There's still another hearing, which I think will affect the congressional races, but probably not the statewide, although who knows, coming up next week. But presuming everything goes as scheduled, then we have to file by May 31st. And we have a lot of work to assemble this massive amount of petitions. So what I would ask everyone to do is to get every signature you possibly can this weekend. We really need everything in hand in my campaign headquarters by Wednesday should be the last day. Thursday, everything has to be in hand. We may have a skeleton crew working on wrapping up, mopping up some petitioning, adding to this throughout the weekend, but we've got to be ready to file on Tuesday. And I have gotten calls in the last couple of days from volunteers. I got a wonderful call this morning from someone who said, I got your email. I really want to help you. I can get 200 signatures this weekend. Can you get me some material? So everyone should chime in and help. It's you can get the information on my website, sareforsenate.com, SAREFOR Senate.com. Also, along with this, I never expected that I would have to be spending a huge percentage of my funds on lawyers, but they seem to be the ones doing very well during this election. And therefore, the campaign also needs funds, because I don't intend that we will have done all of this work and then not get on the ballot. Obviously, they're terrified of people like myself getting on the ballot, and therefore I intend to make sure we do it. So if anyone out there would like to make a donation, it would be greatly appreciated. And you can do that as well. And otherwise, please like and share this video, get it out to people. That also helps us get out the word on our candidacies. So with that, Dennis, I'm turning it over to you for the final words.
I'd like to say something about why people should support the campaign financially and also with their actual work in the street. Sometimes in history, you have an opportunity to do something which at the time you do it, the significance of it is not entirely clear. We're in a country and in time when actually the institutions, the framework seems to be challenged, but it's not really the framework is challenged at all. What is being challenged is the inability of the corrupt to actually continue to pretend to run the actual processes of life and liberty, which are the actual birthright of the American people. They can't run it. And you see their incompetence. But this doesn't mean that the institutions are crumbling. It means that the corruption is crumbling. Now, in order to make good on this, though, it's sort of like the problem of of a crumbling house. If you know the story by Edgar Poe called The Fall of the House of Usher. It's a big mansion, a lot of rooms, and very, very old. And if you look at the building at a certain angle, you notice that there's a crack that runs from the very top of the roof all the way down to the foundation. And the issue of what occurs in the story at a certain point is that that crack suddenly widens and the entire building explodes. That's the crack in the corruption that has dominated American politics, particularly since the assassination of JFK. But you've got to have people that see and know that that crack is there, that call attention to it and act on behalf of the resilience of the institutions of government and self-government. Why should you, at a time when gas is going to $6 and maybe to $9 and maybe to $40 a gallon, why take resources that you may have and deploy them this way? It's sort of like the same question as to when this country was first founded. The reason to do it is because that is you. That is your self-interest. That's what you're protecting. I was at a college graduation, first one I've actually ever been to, and that was today. And you walk out and you see this sea of young people and their optimism, and you know the burden of debt, and you know the other problem, which is the burden of an uncertain future. What are we going to do about that? Well, if you had the opportunity right now to explode the corruption, the mansion of corruption that otherwise dominates their lives, would you do it? You have that opportunity, and you have it in supporting this candidacy and reproducing the same enthusiasm and vision that this candidacy exemplifies. And that's what we're asking you to help us do in the next 5 days. So please join us in that. And I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining me, everyone, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Senator Sayre.